Welcome to a brand new season of Scintillations, the podcast that explores what's now and what's next in consumers, culture, and the business of branding. This season we'll be studying Swiftonomics. Join us as we talk to marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs about what makes Taylor Swift the best brand on the market. Listen in as we unravel the secrets behind her ability to capture hearts, minds, and market share, exploring what makes her a powerhouse of success. If you're a bona fide Swiftie, if you just don't get the hype, or you want to know what you can learn and apply in your own business, this season is for you. Now let's get started with your host, Erica first.
Hi, Angie. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Erica. Thanks for having me.
Why don't we get started by you telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
All right, I could do that. My name is Angie Jones. I am a marketer with about 20 years of experience in media and brand. I actually started my career as a magazine publisher. I had a publishing company, and then the 2008 recession hit, and I decided to fold my company. I sold part and folded the other part, got a quote unquote real job working for other people. And that was around the same time that content marketing was really taking off. And everybody was saying, oh, brands need to learn to become publishers. Well, I had been a publisher. So that was kind of how I came to marketing, was really through content. So I pride myself on kind of taking an audience first lens. I've spent about 15 years in corporate, all the way from social media specialist, all the way up to director of marketing, which is the position I hold now. So I'm full-time director of marketing at Merrill Manufacturing, but then I also do some brand and content consulting on the side. And I am launching a newsletter called Brand Love Brigade, which is all about how digital brands, specifically online stores, can build connected relationships with their customers.
Awesome. And obviously we connected through a shared appreciation, let's say, of Taylor Swift when I was looking for guests. And so I want to get into that a little bit. Today's topic that we're going to be talking about in terms of marketing and Taylor Swift is the idea of having a moral battle. And I just want to do a quick disclaimer for anybody listening or watching that the point of this podcast is not to exalt Taylor, but to understand why she is so huge and what about her is so successful and what we can learn from what it is that she's doing, because she really is a master of business, a master of marketing. And so, as I said, this is a marketing first podcast and foremost, not a Taylor Swift glorification vessel. So I will be sharing sort of both sides of the story that I'm going to be telling now, which is really also when I kind of made the shift from I like Taylor Swift to, okay, she's amazing. And it was this whole scandal that maybe some of you have been following, maybe you haven't been following. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides on the video. So if you are watching that, that's great. If not, I'm going to be reading them for the podcast audience. So just to understand, I'll go through this really quickly and then we're going to talk about it. In 2005, Taylor Swift signs a 13-year record deal with Big Machine Records to produce 6 albums in exchange for cash advance. And this is pretty much standard operating procedure in the music business. She sells her masters, the rights to her masters, to Big Machine Records, but she retains publishing rights. Now, if you don't know a lot about the music industry, if you write your music and you write the lyrics, there's 2 separate usage rights. There's the publishing. So I've written it. I'm part of the authoring of that work. And then there's the performance. Like I have made this track and in its entirety, it can now be licensed to different properties, to Spotify, to radio stations, movies, et cetera, et cetera. When you make an album, it's standard practice that the artist does not own the masters of their own work. And this has been a point of contention for many, many years. Prince ended up changing his name to a symbol over it. George Michael fought the system. There have been numerous artists who have called it musical slavery, essentially, or artistic slavery, the fact that they make this work and then they don't get to own it. Now, what Taylor did, which a lot of musicians don't do because they may be more performers than actually authors, Those publishing rights give her the right to, at a certain point, and you agree it with your record company, like you can't re-record these for 15 years. After that, you can. And so when you hold the publishing rights, you are allowed to go back and redo the music that you have made. And actually, as a result of this situation, those clauses in current contracts have been changed for the more difficult. So that's one negative impact it's definitely had on the music industry. Now, I do want to mention that when Big Machine Records gave Taylor her contract, her father, who was an investment banker for Merrill Lynch, became a 3 to 5% investor in BMR. And he and an executive from her management company held seats on the BMR board. And I only mention that because it comes into play in their negotiations. So in November 2018, when the contract is up with BMR, they're kind of in the process of renegotiating. She decides to jump and go to Universal Music Group, who agreed to give her ownership of the masters. And there's, it's alleged, I'm only reading information that's on the internet. I do not know Taylor Swift or anyone in her camp. So I know what we're all able to find together on the internet. It's rumored that she has a 50-50 split on earnings, which usually is 80-20 in a recording contract. Now, in June 2019, Big Machine Records is acquired by Scooter Braun's Ithaca Holdings for $300 million. He valued Taylor's masters at about $140 million as part of this deal. Taylor has always been very vocal about her dislike for Scooter Braun, saying that he bullied her. Although there's probably personal connections. Scooter Braun was Justin Bieber's manager, who was with Selena Gomez, who is Taylor Swift's best friend. So there's probably some personal stuff mixed up in there as well. Now, Taylor claims to have been blindsided by the news that her record company was sold to Ithaca Holdings, and then Scooter Braun would essentially own her masters. BMR has on their website some receipts that show texts that she sent, that they sent, and it's questionable as to whether or not that's actually true. Now, in July 2019, Kelly Clarkson, music and talk show host, tweets the following on Twitter. So, Taylor Swift, just a thought. You should go in and re-record all the songs that you don't own the masters on, exactly how you did them, but put brand new art and some kind of incentive so fans will no longer buy the old versions. I'd buy all the new versions just to prove a point. 1 month later, Taylor Swift goes on the CBS News Sunday Morning and announces that she's going to be re-recording all of her masters. Now, this is not the first time in history this has been done. A lot of artists have re-recorded them, George Michael being one of them, but it's never been done in such a grandiose fashion where you go in and you re-record 6 albums because of the time it takes, because of the financial investment that it takes. But obviously UMG is behind her because then on her new recordings, they get 50% of that. So it's a good business deal for all involved. Now, from November 2019 to June 2020, there's evidence that suggests that there were talks between Taylor's team and Scooter's team for her to be able to buy her masters. In 2019, apparently he made her an offer for $300 million, but there's all this back and forth around an NDA that he wants her to sign, where in the NDA, she's not allowed to talk about the deal and she's not allowed to talk about him ever in anything but a positive light. And this was enough for her to say no, thank you to the deal. Also, because at this point, she's got it in her head that she's going to re-record these things. So why pay for something when it's probably going to cost her less than $305 million to re-record them anyway? Ithaca claims it made another hard offer of $305 million in June 2020 that Taylor rejected. Scooter sells the masters to Shamrock Holdings, which is the Disney family investment company, for $405 million in October 2020. They had expressed their concern about these re-records because obviously that would make their investment, it would devalue it tremendously in no time. He reassured them, allegedly, that she was only bluffing and would never go through with it. And in November 2020, Taylor started re-recording. In April 2021, she releases Fearless, the Taylor's version, and with it are 6 previously unreleased tracks from that era. So not only is she now putting out her old music, she's also using it as a vehicle to put out new music. And November 2021, she released Red. November 2021, iHeartRadio, which is the largest radio station owner in America, says that they will only play Taylor's version on their properties. July 2022, Speak Now released. October 2023, 1989 released. And there are two left to do, Reputation and Taylor Swift, which was her debut album. And of course, these are the topic of much discussion on social media. So if you know nothing about what happened, that was it. And I remember seeing her on TV talking about this. And as a woman in business, but also as, I guess, a normal human, we do have this kind of instinct to fight the oppressor, right? And and so I was very much drawn to this moral battle that she had waged. And in November 2015, Rush Limbaugh used the phrase hearts and minds in the National Review for the first time. And this was obviously the notorious marketing strategy that Fox News has been using for many, many years, which has been very successful for them. So riling up the crowds on a soapbox has proven very successful. Why do you think it works?
Well, I think it works because our brains are naturally wired for that story. Like you said, like we're looking for that, taking on the oppressor, taking on that's a perfect example of a society genre novel. So I think there are certain things like that that our brains are wired for. I think what Taylor did that I think made it work so well is that it wasn't like she was shoehorning a stand into, she wasn't backing into it, right? Like this was from her core, true to her purpose, true to her values. And she was standing up and saying, I don't believe this is right. And by that, kind of attracting a tribe, which I think is very different than just like pandering, right? And so I think what she did was just be true to herself and be true to her values, which is so like key to her brand, I think, too.
Yeah, I have a daughter, an 18-year-old daughter. And when this was happening, I was thinking, I love that a role model exists where
Yeah.
under normal circumstances, the last however many years of the industry, of the music industry, there hasn't been a very vocal challenge to the accepted way of doing business. And the fact that it was a woman doing it made it twice as profound. Do we think it's ethical though? Because as I saw in the presentation, how the story unfolded is a little dubious. She definitely dialed up certain aspects to gain sympathy from the crowd, which may or may not be completely factual, or at least not in her eyes. Do you think it's an ethical way to market?
So I think for brands, I don't think it's right to manipulate your audience. But I do think it is okay to go out and say, look, this is who we are. This is what we believe on those things that you are willing to stand up for, that are core to your purpose. Then I think it's a matter of attracting those people and attracting the people who believe what you believe. And if you do it like we talked about, like the antagonist, right? So I think a lot of times brands want to paint their competitors as the antagonists. And I actually think that's short-sighted. Usually, if you have a strong why, if you have something that you're trying to do with your brand, there is something out there that is kind of like the embodiment or the is your antagonist, your figurative antagonist in the story. So just an example, like Dove Beauty. I think Dove has done an amazing job of painting their antagonist as this one size fits all image of beauty. And so then what they do when they do that is they say, look, this is something that we believe. And when their customers are like, yes, I believe that too, essentially what they're doing is making their customers be the hero of that story against that figurative antagonist just by like believing in their own beauty and accepting their bodies. And that's a positive brand thing. And it's not manipulative because they're not going out and telling somebody what to think. I remember Jamie Lee Curtis was in one of their ads and you wouldn't see a woman that was her age in a bra and underwear, but she did it and unfiltered. And so they were telling a true story and telling it well in a way that moved their audience. And that I don't think is manipulative.
So do you think, because I like what you said there about it gives me a chance to participate. So there's something about I don't have to go out and wage the battle, but I get kind of the satisfaction of knowing that I'm helping push a healthy fight.
Yeah. And I think Taylor does that too in her lyrics. I think so many of her lyrics, like she's such a gifted storyteller. If you listen to all her songs or stories, there's always an antagonist in there. And almost always that antagonist is trying to hold her down, trying to make her feel less than, make her feel not good enough, or in some way. And I think that's one thing about music that is maybe a little different than brands, or maybe not, is as the listener, you identify with that and you start to paint yourself into that story. And so I think that just because of her medium and she's doing that with her songs already, and then she is bold enough to take a stand and be like, I think this is wrong, and use her platform to say, I think this is wrong. I think that's, then of course her fans rally behind her. And I think the thing that is very different from past artists that have taken this on is this was happening in the age of social media. And I think that that's brands are held to so much more account than they were 20, 30 years ago, music labels included, just because there's so much power in social and so much visibility into everything that brands do.
And certainly, if the idea of galvanizing the troops is part of the strategy, but one of the aspects of it is that everyone's involved, right? It's equalized in hierarchy. You are no more important than me. We can all say our piece about the exact same thing and get airtime or get equal space. And with especially with TikTok and Instagram now that we know that controversy is actually a strategy where people embrace it and it's a way to gain clicks and it's a way to gain notoriety that by participating in the sort of constructive controversy is a way to also drum up noise.
Yeah, it can be. So I think where brands can go wrong is when instead of that being from the inside out, is like going and looking for the controversy and then shoehorning themselves into it. So it can't be manufactured. I think it has to be authentic. It has to go down to the core of who you are. And you have to be willing to stand by it. And I think, especially with Gen Z, I think that they have I think they have excellent bullshit detectors. And so I don't think you can just insert yourself. I think that's where so many brands go wrong is they try to insert themselves into everything that comes up. Whereas if you are doing that from a place of authenticity, it shouldn't be one, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody on your team. They should be like, yes, we believe that. I know we believe that. And it shouldn't be manufactured.
Yeah, I love that idea of it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on your team because that is a great guardrail to know if you've just gone too far. Because while you were talking, I was thinking of course, the Bud Light mess that they made for
Yeah.
themselves. And that's it. When you do go out and court controversy that's not yours, or court a moral battle that's not inherently yours, it becomes so artificial and painted on that it does tremendous damage and becomes actually you become famous for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, have those conversations, know where you stand on that, but it doesn't have to be central to your marketing. If you want to have a conversation about Black Lives Matter, that you should have that conversation, but it doesn't need to belong in your marketing material.
Mhm. What do you, so going back to this point of like where what's okay and what's not okay for brands. Let's say I'm a regular brand. I would like to sort of galvanize people, get on board. I'm looking for a fight to get people excited about how what are my rules in doing so?
So I think the biggest rule is just being real and authentic, and also being relevant. I think is another one. I had a mentor that at my previous job who did a fantastic job of this, and I compared how he went about developing our purpose and our values. It's way more archaeology than it is manufacturing. So it wasn't the leadership team sitting in a room. It wasn't the marketing team sitting in a room. It was going out and interviewing our frontline people that were talking to customers every day. It was talking to the people back in the warehouse who were packing boxes. Like what makes working here great? Why do you work here? What do you believe? Why are we different? And having those conversations, I think, kind of unearthed something that there versus trying to manufacture a purpose and then apply it across the organization. And so I think once you have that, then that becomes your guardrail, really. We belong in this. We have something to say about this, or we have something to say about this, but we're just going to talk about it, not in the interest of garnering eyeballs or getting more online attention.
And you had previously mentioned the idea of an antagonist, right? That obviously in Taylor's story, there was a very specific human antagonist. What kind of antagonists do brands have?
Yeah, so I think Dove, I think a good example there is, they think like having a standard of beauty. So it's an idea, right? Their antagonist isn't a person, it isn't another company, it's an idea. And there's putting a stake in the ground and saying we believe in this. I think another example would be Oatly. So Oatly, it appears, is taking on the dairy industry, but if you really like look at their ads and dig into like what they are about, they're not actually, their antagonist is not the dairy industry. Their antagonist is climate change. Their antagonist is the climate crisis. And so then you have other people who are looking at that and going, I share that belief. And so now I'm listening to what you're saying because you're relevant to me.
Right. So you want to give, going back to that original participation there, you want to have something where people are able to participate vicariously in a bigger ideal simply by engaging with your brand.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, Seth Godin and tribes. And I think that's a really powerful way to build a tribe. But you won't build a business that appeals to everyone either. You're going to appeal to those people who have like a shared belief or believe in the fight that you're fighting.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because that's been a big shift in marketing in the last 5 to 10 years, where once, and even Taylor got into a position where she had to ultimately take a stance too, because, she was from Pennsylvania, she lived in Tennessee. Everyone wanted to know her political leanings. Which side are you? And she was kind of
Hmm.
on the fence there. And it gets to a point where ultimately you can risk losing both of your audiences if you don't claim a tribe. And so, if you're willing to, or if you're going to get into certain conversations, you're going to have to put a stake in the ground or a flag somewhere and say, oh,
Yeah.
this is what we stand for. Otherwise, you're just going to kind of have to live in the middle ground all the time, which, is a safe space, but obviously you don't get the hearts and minds from that.
Yeah. And I think you can, especially like on political things, I think that that's a really tough position for brands because like a personal brand, like that's different. A brand that really is a person. But when you represent a brand that is a company made of, hundreds or thousands of people, then you have the internal component too, right? So if we as a company take this stance, what does that tell our employees?
Right.
And so I think you want to be careful about which doors you open because once you start talking about that topic and then you are, like you said, inviting people to say, well, where do you stand on this?
Yeah.
And so unless you're willing to put that stake in the ground, don't don't walk down that road if you can help.
Yeah, so if you're gonna launch a battle, you have to be willing to take it through all the way to the end.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Taylor has done such a fantastic job of telling stories that align, with what she believes and that make her audience able to kind of put themselves in the story. And I think that's what we see in that emotional bond that her audience has with her. I think that is due to just very consistent, very informed, very authentic storytelling. So it's fun to watch. And I think there's a lot that as marketers we can learn from her.
Yeah, and I'm doing an episode on the storytelling and the emotional connection that she has with
Hmm.
the sense of belonging that you have when you enter into her universe, whether you're 12 or 49. That's
Yeah.
as sort of a universal, talks about a universal situation of being in the world that really anyone participate in. And as you say, the the battle that she waged here was sort of on behalf of multiple generations of women, which is like, you know what, we're tired of this
Hmm.
happening. Now, of course, this doesn't happen just to women, it happens to men and women in the music industry. Now, as a result of this, as I mentioned at the beginning, the music companies or the record labels have now extended the re record period to something that would make it impossible, nearly impossible for anyone to do again. What do we think about this? Was it irresponsible at the end of the day?
I don't ever think it's irresponsible to stand up for something you believe in. I don't think she probably would have foreseen that, but I think every battle has casualties.
Yeah.
I mean, that is there's a downside to everything. And, I think you can sit and analyze, is this going to be worth it at the start? But I don't think you really have any way to know. And I think if there is a battle that you feel you should insert yourself in or that you should take up, I think far better to go forth and try to stick up for what you believe is right than to hold back out of fear of what might happen
Right.
and never take the step. That's how I that's how I look at it, I guess personally. But yeah, it's a tough one to call because you just never know.
It's like that ethics question. No, the friend or the five people. um,
Yes, yes.
and there's been, there's lots of speculation, which is what I imagine her team loves the most because conversation is currency. But there's lots of speculation that when she moves into a new phase of her career, maybe stops performing, that she would open her own record label with completely different terms for musicians. So the first like pro musician record label, which would essentially put everyone else out of business. And so that could
Yeah.
be an interesting way. And I actually can see that happening. And that then everyone else will have to align to her or they'll be dead.
Yeah. No, that's the category of one right there. So,
Yeah. So I'm excited to see when and if that happens. I'm relatively certain that that's what stage 3 looks like for her because I know she loves to rewrite the game and is always 10 steps ahead of all of us. So,
yeah. No, that will be interesting to see for sure. Yeah.
break the model and if it works, everyone eventually has to bend to you.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon has done that exact same thing. So,
Yeah. So just break it and rebuild it.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think it'll be because it's Mark Cuban who's working on pharmaceuticals. No,
Yes. Yep.
I
That
think
would be one to watch.
that'll be interesting to keep an eye on as well. Okay. Angie, thank you so much for being with me today. This was super interesting and fun.
Thank you for having me, Erica. This was fun. I love this topic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Scintillations. If you've enjoyed listening to us, please subscribe, rate, and review. It helps us share our learnings with more curious and interested people like yourself. See you next time.